Okay, you ready? All right, this is part 3 of my ongoing series this week on Rav Moshe's tshuva on the inyan of Lilmud, or Iyun Sefer Bizman Hazaras haShatz. And what's the deal with that? In the first section on Monday, we saw Rav Moshe going over Rabbi Avraham Gominer's explanation on this, of going through different sources that are from the time after Sidurim were printed and therefore more widely available, as well as other books that people were able to look at, versus the second section, the first part of which we saw yesterday, and which we'll be concluding with in the second section today, and we'll also be coming to the conclusion. In the second section, we're dealing with Rishonim and other earlier works, basically pre-printing press. So therefore, you don't have this, but we're still going to be talking we saw yesterday what's the deal with the need of having asara who are not only listening to the bracha, but listening to the various brachas of the haShatz, but also paying attention. So in this section, which, so now today on the source sheet, we're in section 2b, where Rav Moshe is discussing a sort of a continuation of what we saw yesterday in the second part in section 2a, with the need of 10 who are listening and paying attention and answering amen to the various brachas of the haShatz. So now, in this particular section, he talks about what happens if the haShatz starts, you have asara who are listening and so forth, and someone leaves for whatever reason, and now you only have 9. What happens? And he says it's actually in finding the Beis Yosef that the haShatz is supposed to continue going. He keeps going even though you don't have 10. So we saw at the very end of yesterday's section that it's in the Torah that it's close to being the brachos would be levatala. So why close? So he says actually it's not actually. It's close to being levatala, but they're not actually levatala. And we're going to, at the end of this section 2b, see why they're not actually levatala. So he now, in the several lines down, you have the source sheets, that even if the 10 are not directing their minds to the rest of the blessings, even if they're there, but they're not answering amen, that they're considered as if they've left, even though they're still there, which it seems funny, because because if you're not there, okay, you don't have 9. But what if you have 10, which is not? It's almost like you have a person who doesn't count, which is kind of weird. And he quotes from the Yerushalmi that he only quotes a snippet. I'll tell you that it comes from a brisa in which the brisa in the Yerushalmi there states 5 different situations where liturgical situations where someone starts or the congregation starts, and when you don't have 10, what happens? You still continue, even though you don't have 10, you don't have asara, you don't have a minyan. But those who did leave, meaning you did start something that was a davar shebekdusha, but now it's weird because you're saying something that requires 10, but now you don't have 10, and it feels awkward. So he says, so that the brisa then calls out upon them the part of a verse in Isaiah, Yeshaya, and the deserters of God will be consumed. V'ozvei Hashem yichalu. That the deserters of God will be consumed, which is the first time, which is interesting that we have this sort of theological dimension that we're supposed to be having 10 there who are somehow, I guess it's a kahal representing a certain unit who are somehow connecting to God, and now we have a leaving of God because they've left the kahal, they've left the 10 who are now 9 or less, and they're considered as somewhat of a deserter. And to bolster his argument that this has some halachic weight, he then brings in Rif and Rosh as saying, look, we actually have this brisa is actually considered in the halachic canon. It's not, I'm not just using it to bolster my opinion. But then he says this is only when there are not 10 remaining, but as he looks to the Ramah. And then he says, but this is only if, the problem is, and that's only when the haShatz is still talking, is still being mevarech, but you don't have 10. And okay, so this guy, you have someone who's there, you don't have. The funny thing to me though is you have 10 people there, you got it, and if you have a couple people who are not saying amen, how do you know who is and isn't answering amen? Like you don't know like unless you know everybody there, like let's say you have 17 people there, but only 8 are answering Amen. Like it's hard to judge. Anyways, in the very end of this section, he comes down. He says, so why is it umash enu levatalo? How come it's not levatalo if you have the only like 8 people there or something? Umishum de gomer gam biyatze. Sorry, if someone who isn't really who isn't paying attention so much isn't answering, I mean, it's just like when someone is left. It counts. So these blessings are still count, but that person then has this this name of ill repute or whatever. It's not pleasant. Okay, so now we've dealt with that in this whole second section. You really need 10 people there who are answering Amen, who are paying attention and knows what's going on. So, but we haven't dealt with what's going on with Lil Mod Sefer or Iyun B'Sefer B'Zman Hazaras haShatz. So you're like there. We don't know if you're paying attention or not. So he comes back to what we saw on Monday in the first section with what Magen Avraham was doing, what Rabbi Goner was talking about. So he basically reappraises what he said before, and then we get to the exciting part. You can read this. It's all on the net. And he says, this is particularly amusing to me, and I think it should be particularly amusing to other people. V'lachein asar lilmod bishas Hazaras haShatz. It's totally forbidden. You can't do it. But then, b'chol ofen yesh medina v'yesh mitam hamaga. So you can do it. Which is like, what? You really shouldn't be. What?
What was the ending?
Yesh medina v'yesh mitam
Yesh medina v'yesh mitam hamaga.
I'm just saying there are 2 reasons for it.
That's what we say.
Oh, really?
It's usher for the reason of that I said before.
Also
Medina,
Medina,
usher
and
to
there's also the Magen Avraham's idea that other people will learn from.
Oh, maybe when it's not 9. Sorry, when there are not 9. I stand corrected. When you don't have 9, there's no way you can do that. But if you do have 9 aside from you, then he's not saying this explicitly. But when you do have a number of people aside from you, then you can learn. But then he's not stating this explicitly. But we're going back to the first section.
Then you have the Magen Avraham.
Right, where you do have to be concerned of other people learning from you. So practically, if you're in a regular base Knesset and people might learn from you, especially if you're a Rav, for instance, so it could become a problem if a whole bunch of people are learning, and or more specifically, they're not paying attention. You have a whole bunch of people who are disconnected from the main event of what's going on.
That never happens, Israel.
What? Yeah. But it may be a totally different case of in the yeshiva, like Bnei Yeshiva. So okay, so you have some people learning, but like people are going to be having at least enough attention to the main event, what's going on. That's the Hazaras haShatz. So maybe. What?
That was the whole point. Even if you are saying Amen, if you're not fully paying attention, is it possible to be learning and listening and having kavanah?
You don't have 9. You need to have 9 paying attention.
Well, something that he doesn't discuss, which used to be brilliant, is like how much kavanah. Like it's like a qualitative thing. Like you can have a lot of kavanah, you can have some sort of inkling of kavanah, and he doesn't deal with that. He doesn't. It's almost like a binary thing. You either have it or you don't. He doesn't get into, well, you can have more kavanah. It's not his issue. So if there are any other questions?
So if you want to learn during Hazaras haShatz, you need to go around and find 9 people and get them to tell you that they are going to be having kavanah and saying amen during.
Well, that's the problem that I raised just a couple minutes ago. It's like maybe you have 17 people and half of them are
learning.
Maybe they're there. Maybe they're not even like, you can't see that they're actively doing anything else. So they could just sort of be like in a zone, just zoning out. And you don't have 10 people who are answering a main or 9 or whatever.
So how does this work with just like in Israel? Before I
look around, it kicks
like this, grabbing someone off the street to stand in as a 10th person.
I don't know. I'm just answering that. All right. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.